Hey everybody, I'm Chris Metzler here, one of the programmers with SF Doc Fest. We're celebrating our 23rd year of bringing some of the most interesting, cool, and irreverent documentaries from around the world to the Bay Area. We're lucky enough to just see this really gem of a documentary. Film is Dead, Long Live Film. And we have director Peter Flynn here. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Chris. Very happy to be here.
Maybe you could kind of give us a little peek, like what was the kind of inspiration for making the film and kind of going down this rabbit hole?
Well, I had made a number of years ago, I'd made a documentary on the demise of analog or photochemical film projection in movie theaters. Beginning in the 2010s, commercial theaters made this transition to digital. And I wanted to get into the projection booth and look at what was being lost when we went from the handling and the projecting of 35 millimeter or 70 millimeter film to ones and zeros effectively. And the result was the dying of the light. And it really looked at everything that was lost with that shift. And so with this film, I felt, well, let me look at what's being saved with the shift to digital. Let's look at what people are doing to hold on to and maintain and keep relevant analog or photochemical film in the digital age. So if the dying of the light looks at what was lost with the shift to digital, this film looks at what's being saved.
Very cool. Well, it's kind of fascinating. I think many of us, that love films. I mean, know a teensy little bit about it, but it's just great how you kind of unpeeled these layers. I was kind of curious, how did you meet some of the different people in the film? Were they folks that you had met before, and like was a lot of it word of mouth? And a lot of this is kind of were people wanting to kind of like, I guess, get a camera in their life and kind of share their love.
Well, I met a lot of these people from my last film, The Dying of the Light. A lot of film collectors are projectionists. They take the film home with them. So that was the entry point, was the last film. And it's such a small community. It's such a small culture that everybody knows everybody. So once you do an interview with one person, shoot with one person, they connect you to another who connects you to somebody else. And so there's just this little chain of collector islands that you hop around on. So it was very easy. Once you get into this community, it's so self-enclosed that it's very easy to move around it. And in terms of people wanting to be on camera, I think what's happened in the last 10, 15 years is that collectors are getting older. They're looking back on their lives, 50, 60 years of handling and maintaining 35 or 16 or 8 millimeter film. And they're looking at the end of the road, and they want to pass this on, and they want to say, hey, this is wonderful. Please, somebody take this and carry this tradition on. So there was this sense of looking back, and also this urgency and a need to look ahead and pass this on to a newer generation. So for many people, the idea of a film and the idea of documenting something of their love and passion for this archaic, near obsolete format was very, very welcoming and very exciting for them. I
And
didn't have to kick down too many doors.
in telling a film that's kind of a little bit, kind of self-reflexive of the story of, film and, cinema, what was your kind of aesthetic approach, in the sense that, like, was there like a kind of was there something going into it of the way that you knew you wanted to kind of visually tell the story, or did that get kind of informed as you were making the film?
Yes, no, there absolutely was. With the dying of the light, I had this very big canvas. I had these deteriorating old picture palaces. I had the booth. And I had a much bigger canvas. But going into this film, I realized I'm not going to be shooting in huge old picture palaces. I'm going to be shooting in basements and attics and these small spaces. So rather than go big, I wanted to go small and small and small and get closer and closer, closer to the machinery, closer to the film, and closer to the people. Because in a sense, this is a culture of fetishism, right? It's the fetishization of film. And fetishism is all about getting close to something, getting up close and personal with something. So I wanted to just get in closer and closer and closer. So my lens of choice was this, the 100 millimeter macro lens. If you can see this, I shot so much of my film with this very lens because it allows you to get close, close to these objects. So if there's an overarching kind of aesthetic feel to the film, I think it's that closeness and that intimacy to the machinery, to the film, and to the people. At least I hope that's the case.
Well, having spent time in there, in these worlds for quite a long time, with the previous film and with this one, what was kind of one of the surprises or kind of biggest challenges that you didn't kind of expect as you started to weave together these stories?
Well, the biggest challenge, and it wasn't entirely a surprise, is just how small the spaces you're working in are. These are little these are Aladdin caves, of all these decades and decades of cinema treasures. And it's very difficult to get yourself and a camera and a light in there and to maneuver. So I was constantly kind of squeezing in and moving around. That was probably the biggest challenge in terms of shooting. But in terms of the bigger picture as a whole, was I really wanted to get this tapestry, this big tapestry look at a culture in decline, a culture that most likely won't be with us in 10, 15 years from now. So I wanted to capture it as big picture as I could. So the challenge was really in finding the right people who fit all these different aspects of the culture, and then to document them over a significant amount of time. That you had arcs, you had somebody saving a film, restoring that film, and then eventually premiering that film at a theater, or you had somebody who was looking to donate their collection to an archive or a library, and their struggles to do so. And those stories take time, they take years. So this was a film that was maybe a little over 6 years in production, and it needed that time to find all those arcs. I don't know if that's necessarily a difficulty or a challenge. Filmmaking for the most part, Chris, is a very easy process. I know filmmakers like to talk about the difficulties and the challenges, but most of it's pressing buttons. And usually you're pressing buttons while you're eating a sandwich if you're like me. So it's not that difficult. What's difficult are the things that are difficult in life, dealing with other people, and the fact that there's never enough time. There's just never enough time, not enough hours in the day, weeks in the year, years in your life. So there's just that kind of struggle to deal with not enough time, and just to deal with the various personalities that, including your own, of course, that come into play. That's the challenge. The rest is, it's just like I say, it's pressing buttons and working through some fairly commonsensical kind of questions and arcs.
I love your attitude on that. What do you think, as you go forward and the film kind of gets out there in the world and it generates different conversations with audiences? Is like, what do you see for the kind of future of this community, and like also, for young folks that watch the film, like what are things that I guess we can do, to make sure that this history isn't lost?
Well, two things, I suppose. Firstly, there still is a lot of film out there that can be found and either restored and migrated over onto digital, or film that can be found and deposited in the Library of Congress or somewhere else. In the course of making this film myself, I'd meet people and they'd give me a reel of film. They'd say, "Here, I don't have room for this," or "Will you just take it?" And I ended up last year donating many, many, many reels to the Library of Congress, including the oldest piece of film that they now have in the repository from the late 1880s, which I got from somebody, and it was just sitting in their fridge for decades. in the freezer where film stays safe. So there's a lot of film out there. So I think if there's one aspect, it's that little call to arms that time is running out, but it hasn't run out completely. And there is still film out there that can be saved and restored and passed on to a museum or an archive or someone else who can prolong its life and ensure that it gets passed down. That's the first thing. And I think the second thing is, and my hope for people who watch this film is that they'll get an appreciation of how film was for 80, 90, 100 years of its lifespan. I'm 51 now, and when I hit my teens, videotape was already on the scene. So my kind of primary encounter with film is VHS. And anybody younger than me has absolutely no connection with film, physical analog film with projectors, with reels and stacks of reels in their basement or in their bedroom. That's just completely alien to them now. So I would hope that people would watch this film and get a sense that film before digital was something that was very different and very unique, and that something of that older culture saw film differently. And I hope they get a sense of that. That film wasn't always ones and zeros, and it wasn't always something on a touch screen. It had a long and very different history before that. So I hope something of that comes along and some appreciation of that, because it's becoming increasingly rare now for people to really see and interact with film.
Yeah, well, especially even people that used to love film, it's like,
Right.
a lot of
Yes.
people have moved on. So for the folks that have continued to kind of, keep the fires burning, it's definitely a rarity.
And those who are out there, go and support them. If somebody is running 16 millimeter film on a projector in some school auditorium or in some local cafe, go out and support it. You'll be surprised at how lovely and how different that experience is.
Yeah,
And
very much
also,
so.
and also, that when we think of film, of course, we think of 35 millimeter theatrical films. We think of the studios and the genres and the big stars. What we don't think of are all the home movies that were shot between 1923 and the 80s, 60 years of 8 millimeter home movies. We don't think of all the school educational films that people suffered through from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and into the 80s. We don't think about all the workplace instructional films, TV commercials, TV shows. So much was shot and distributed and made available to the public on film that we just are not really conscious of, because we think of film as a big screen theatrical format. But that's only one portion of what film is. And so I think the film can give you a sense of the big picture of what film was for all these decades.
Most definitely, and I should probably actually give just for those of us in the Bay Area, to give a plug to the Prelinger Archives and Library, because they do
Right.
regular screenings of old home movies and things that get pulled out. And Rick Prelinger, the kind of lead archivist there, he does this kind of Lost Landscapes of San Francisco screening.
Yes.
Is great just in the sense of like learning the history of the films, but also there's a lot of calling out into the audience of like, okay, well, trying to figure out, identify different places and
Yes.
time.
And of course,
it's a very communal experience.
Yeah, and Rick, of course, is in the film, and he's one of those Deus Ex Machina figures that comes in near the end and says, "Here's one way to keep film alive." And what he's doing is he's taking this home movie format and he's putting it on the big screen, reinventing it in a way, and thus making it relevant again. So it isn't just a matter of, say, digitizing a film and then putting it back on the big screen where it was originally intended to be seen. It's a case of reinventing and reimagining what cinema could be, which is what Rick is all about. And so he features quite prominently in the last act of the film.
Yeah. Well, very cool. Well, thanks again, Peter. Appreciate it. What's the best way to kind of continue to follow your exploits and also kind of spread word about the film?
Well, you can, my website, coldeyefilms.com. We'll list all the upcoming screenings, and hopefully when we go to Blu-ray and streaming, all of that will be announced on the website. So that's probably the best, most straightforward way. coldeyefilms.com.
Very cool. Well, thanks again for being part of SF DocFest, Peter. Really appreciate it, and looking forward to sharing the film here in San Francisco.
Oh, listen, Chris, thank you for having me, and thank you for showcasing this film. It's a real privilege, it's a real honor, and it's very difficult for filmmakers, independent, non-commercial filmmakers like me, to get their films out there. So festivals like this, when they get behind your film, it really means a great deal. So thank you.
You're welcome. Okay.